have a conversation next time you go to dinner with your friends and say, what do you want to happen to you when you die? How do you picture the end? And I guarantee you will have some people at the table that may get up and leave the table and refuse to have the conversation. But you will have some very nuanced and thoughtful conversations with other people who have maybe thought about it that could change the way that you think about it. These are conversations we should be having with our parents, with our grandparents. If we have adult children, even though we never want to think about it, it's important to have those conversations so that they know what you want.
Welcome, listeners. Today, we're pleased to welcome Teresa. Teresa has been in the health coverage and benefits industry for over a decade, and before that, she was a communications professional in state government. She has a master's degree in health administration, during which she completed award-winning research and end-of-life communication training for medical students. She's a certified mindfulness facilitator, coaching teams and individuals in mindfulness techniques for guided relaxation, stress reduction, and embodiment, which we leverage the heck out of as a benefit for Nova Associates.
Welcome to the podcast, Teresa. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So you have a unique experience and perspective on the health insurance industry. So today we're going to ask you, what is something you've learned that has been so helpful you tell everyone about it?
So I'm the person at a party who's likely to talk to you about death, which makes me super popular at social events. But that's because I've learned that it's like the thing that no one's talking about that everyone needs to talk about. And so my whole career in health insurance over the last 12 years, I've worked in every piece of health insurance, whether it's been commercial or Medicaid or Medicare and on the self-funded side. And in Medicare, you do have people talk a little bit more about end-of-life planning in terms of like the paperwork, like making sure you have your power of attorney and your health proxy and your advanced care directives, or if someone's in terminal illness, making sure they have their paperwork all documented and posted on their fridge for in case there's an emergency personnel that comes into their house, like all those sorts of technical things. But the thing that I've learned over the last 12 years is that we're not having conversations about the reality of getting to the end of life and making sure that we are focusing on the quality at end of life as opposed to just the quantity of time that we get. And this was actually what led me to my research in my healthcare administration program, but it's also been something that I've tried to weave into all the different aspects of healthcare that I've worked in, because I think we need to fundamentally reframe how we talk about death and dying just culturally. It's a very taboo topic. I understand why it's a taboo topic. Grief is one of the worst things that we experience as humans. Loss is something that is very hard to navigate. But I think we make it harder because we don't talk about it and because we don't have good ways to prepare ourselves for it. And conversation is really the way to break the ice and start talking about it. So I can joke that I'm the person at a party that will talk to you about death. I actually think it's really important to have those conversations about at any age. I mean, maybe not with like little kids, but any adult that you're talking to, it's an interesting conversation to think about and to share with your friends. Have a conversation next time you go to dinner with your friends and say, what do you want to happen to you when you die? How do you picture the end? And I guarantee you will have some people at the table that may get up and leave the table and refuse to have the conversation. But you will have some very nuanced and thoughtful conversations with other people who have maybe thought about it that could change the way that you think about it. These are conversations we should be having with our parents, with our grandparents. If we have adult children, even though we never want to think about it, it's important to have those conversations so that they know what you want. The worst possible situation to be in is to have a loved one who is facing the end of their life, and in worst case scenario may have dementia and can no longer have the conversation. And you don't know what they want. You don't know what they prefer. You don't know what would make them more comfortable. You're kind of guessing based on what you know. And then, oh, wait, the family disagrees. And then it can turn into unraveling a family structure because there's so much infighting about what you should do. And how do you know it's the end? And do you put them in hospice or do you not put them in hospice? So if you start having those conversations in a meaningful way, and it can be funny and it can be lively and you can make it a joke. Like I worked with a guy who was always telling us that he was planning the soundtrack for his funeral. Like he would just announce it in the office every time he had a new song. He was like, oh, I just heard Carry On My Wayward Son by Kansas. And then, that's going on the list. I forgot that's a good song. That's going on the funeral list. And it
Oh, I
became
love that.
Isn't that great? But that for me, I started thinking about like, well, what would I want if, at my services? And do I even want services? And so you start thinking about like how it looks on, that last celebration that your family and friends have around your life. You can make that kind of what you want it to be as long as they know what your wishes are. And I've been to services where someone didn't really say what they wanted at the end, and you feel like it's not them. You feel like the celebration is not really for them, it's for other people. And that can actually make the grieving process harder and more complex over time if you feel like they got kind of like a short shrift at the end. But where the conversation is not happening, that in most cases that it really needs to happen, is between doctors and their patients. This is something that Atul Gawande talks about a lot in his excellent book, Being Mortal, which I highly recommend if you want to delve more deeply into the topic. But doctors, and I found this in my research, don't really get a lot of training in how to have end-of-life conversations. So over the course of 4 years of medical school, they get about 10 hours of training total on how to talk to their patients when they are facing a life-limiting illness or a terminal diagnosis. And really, even until the 60s, doctors used to just not tell their patients that they had a terminal illness or that their time might not be as much as they think. And one of the things that changed that was Elisabeth Kubler-Ross's book that now everyone's familiar with it because it's even memeable now, the 5 stages of death and dying. But what most people don't realize is that framework actually began as a way when doctors started telling people for the first time that they had terminal illness, that was the process that the dying person went through to accept their own mortality and to be able to comfortably transition to what comes after this life, whatever your belief is that it is. And people think that is the grieving process, which it is in some ways, but don't understand that the origin of it was really that was how people started processing getting that information from their doctor. And I'm sad to say that the conversations have mostly not changed or improved since then. And it makes sense when you think about it. Doctors are in the business of healthcare. They're in the business of prolonging life and making sure that people, have as many days as possible. There are whole pharmaceutical divisions that are around this, even if it just buys an extra 4 months. That extra 4 months could be so precious to the family, but it also puts a lot of cost on the healthcare system. And are you really getting quality out of that 4 months? So you need to have a conversation with your loved ones, even before they're sick. And especially in the case of someone who is diagnosed with early stage dementia, who will eventually lose the ability to tell you what they really want and what makes them comfortable. What defines quality of life for you and not just quantity? It's not just about the advanced care directive of I don't want to be on a feeding tube or I don't want to be ventilated. It's really like, at what point do you want to stop seeking curative treatment? At what point do you maybe want to consider a transition to hospice or palliative care? And through my research, I actually ended up getting so passionate about the topic, I became a volunteer at hospice, in our local hospice, which is a wonderful organization. And I would spend every Wednesday afternoon sitting there with patients at the end. And it's when you do that, you just have a totally different experience of what it means to be a dying person.
Well, it's funny, not funny, but it's interesting.
This conversation's been amazing. You're a real gas at parties, I bet, Teresa.
I am on the Hospice Foundation website, and they've got a list of suggested questions to start a conversation, which I think are wonderful. And you've already touched on some of them. What do you value most about your life? Do you want to die in your home? How much pain is acceptable to you? I mean, these are things like, I've talked to my parents about that, and my mom's like, I want to become a tree and have a party. But, that's our sense of humor. But that's not as easy for everybody to talk about, especially if it's with somebody who is younger and they have a terminal illness or.
Right. Or if you don't know. you know, my little sister was born with a congenital heart defect, and the doctors just did such a good job. Like, she was always just a couple months behind whatever the next iteration of keeping her well was. And so for a really, I mean, at the time she was diagnosed, throughout her life, it was kind of science and clinical advances and pharmaceutical advances and surgical advances that allowed her to live as long as she did. But as a sibling, she was a peer. So there was never a conversation that she would die young. She just always lived.
Right.
So I don't know that you even have to be in the state, like you're saying with your parents, Jolene, of unwellness to have the conversation. Because if you can, you know, we talked to my in-laws about their thoughts and wishes just because we were watching the Seinfeld episode where they're, you know, Elaine goes with Kramer and they're trying to make decisions. You know, he said, I feel like, Elaine, you're going to make good choices for me. And so they're running through all the options. And she was like, pull it, nah.
No,
you know,
you don't want to live like that.
right. And then he seemed to like start to get nervous. But if you can have that kind of conversation in a more relaxed moment, I feel like it gives you, as someone who might be helping someone or working with providers to make decisions when you don't want to be making decisions, it gives you some, it's never easy, obviously, but it gives you some reassurance that you're acting not in based on what you want for that person, but you're kind of aligning to what they want to see for their life.
Right. I mean, I think the thing that we also forget too is once someone gets labeled as a dying person or they have a terminal illness, you can forget that there is still a tremendous capacity for joy in that space. So yes, they may not be the same as they were before. They may be going through serious health struggles. They may be experiencing pain, but they can have the same capacity for joy and vibrancy that any of us have. But a lot of times they forget, or we forget, and we forget to bring that to them. And that's one of the things that I liked about volunteering is I could just go, like my whole role as a volunteer was to just be a benign presence, sit, keep people company, refill their water pitcher, whatever. And I remember this one patient who was there and he didn't really have any family around. He was there kind of by himself and he was lonely. So I was hanging out with him, and they have bird feeders outside of every window. We were talking about the birds coming in. And then he started talking about how much he loved Motown music, which I also love very much. And he's just started singing My Girl in bed. And I started singing along with him. And we just had this incredibly joyful moment of sitting there watching these birds and singing My Girl to each other. And I have never seen him again. I'm sure that he has gone on his way, but I will never forget him. So even though he didn't really have family around him, he's still going to be with me forever. And that is really a gift when you can sit and have that moment of joy with somebody in a very unexpected situation. I think we can deprive ourselves of those opportunities, even with our own loved ones, when we kind of close the door and say, well, they're at the end, so that's it. No, capacity for joy goes until our very last moments.
That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. It's funny. None of us are getting out of here alive.
Right.
So,
and we forget that.
Right. Some are more untimely and it's unfortunate. But I think, yeah, being present, living in the moment, and, you can clone yourself all you want. But at the end of the day, like I said, we're all in the same boat when it comes to that. So that was a really great story. I was actually going to ask you to share. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I'm glad that you shared one of your stories from your time with hospice. That was a great. Thank you.
So let me ask a quick question, because I always get overwhelmed by the number of forms one needs to have.
Oh, so many forms.
Right. So I think that's the thing, because my dad is now wintering / fall / springing in Florida. And I was like, I need you to fill out a healthcare proxy. And he was like, why? I said, I just feel like this is something we're supposed to have. But then I didn't know where do I put that? Who do I give it to? Does it have to does it need to be with him, or does it need to be with me? Do I need to have it at hospitals or with a PCP? Like, what are the forms that people need to look for to have some things in place? And then where do those forms need to live? Do you know that, Teresa?
Yeah, the healthcare proxy form should live with everyone who's on it. So you should have one. Your dad should have one. Anyone else who may be like, say, if there's another relative that lives nearby, or they have a close family friend that may also be able to access that form if they're incapacitated, they should at least know where it is, or it should be kept in a place that you can easily grab, particularly if someone is in frailer health. And you definitely need the healthcare proxy. Power of attorney is very useful to have. And any advanced care directives where you go through and say explicitly what your wishes are. This was actually the thrust of the Kramer and Elaine episode, was asking about all the different things.
Yes.
It's very technical how you go into the advanced care directives. It does become more important as someone goes to, approaches a state of frailty, but it's useful to have at any time. I know I went through and reconsidered mine in the age of COVID and made some revisions to mine to include things that I wouldn't have considered before just because of the nature of the illness. The other thing that you must have is HIPAA authorization to talk about the other person's health status. And I think that's the other thing that gets forgotten. So if it's, you need to have that HIPAA authorization for anyone for whom you're a healthcare proxy.
And does that go to your insurance plan, so let's say I'm talking about my dad, I'm going to have him fill out a HIPAA auth that includes my sister and I.
Yep.
And he is going to be the one to carry that around with him. Does he have to turn that into places, or he should just keep it in his wallet?
The doctor's offices should have it anywhere he gets regular treatment. They usually make you sign a HIPAA authorization that tells who else can participate in your healthcare information. And the other one is it should be with your insurance company if you will be working on their behalf on understanding any claims that have gone through.
In this example, with my dad's insurance.
Yes.
He's got to send it to his insurance. Oh, that should be easy.
Yeah. I mean,
I need a HIPAA auth to submit a HIPAA auth so I can do it on his behalf.
Let me just get an authorization for this proxy form so I can fill out this other directive form. It's all this wonderful legalese, but yeah,
I'm going to turn this into
at 40 just to make sure we have all the layers of stuff.
Right.
I know what my husband and I are doing on our next date night. We haven't had these conversations yet,
But see, that is how you make it fun, is actually to incorporate it into something you're already doing. And you could, I don't know, have a glass of wine and relax about it. It doesn't have to be the most serious conversation.
I'm making that playlist.
Yeah. I mean, also, there could be issues if, say, he wants to be buried and you want to be cremated. What do you do then? How do you navigate that? Do your ashes go in with him, or, those are things to think about. I remember we have this board at work where people can sell things that they have that they no longer need.
Oh,
and
no.
Somebody a few years ago was selling their burial plot. And it was 2 spaces, and they were like willing to divide. And I was like, oh, there's a story there.
I'm not here for the plots. I'm here for the story. Dish.
Right? I'm like, you can do what you want with that plot, but I want to know what happened there. That's something.
I have so many questions and I don't even know what to say.
And all I keep thinking is there's a lot of dirt there.
See, this is what I mean. It can be fun and it can be funny. And it should be, because at the end of life, you should be able to celebrate the life that you lived. And, one of the things you can do in mindfulness, too, if you do have a regular mindfulness or meditation practice, is really sit with some of these questions and issues. Think about, what do you want people to say in your eulogy, or how do you want to be remembered at the end of your life? These are things that, if you consider them, you will actually have a happier, more fulfilling life, because you will know what really matters to you. It's all based on your values and what really makes you happy. And if you keep your focus on that, knowing that it is going to end and we don't know when, and we don't usually get to choose how or when, you will make every day between now and then another opportunity to have joy and fun and excitement and live the life you really want, instead of just letting the days pass by.
Yeah. And so, to-do list, make a playlist, fill out a bunch of forms at the doctor's office.
Right.
And then create an epitaph.
Yes.
Punny.
Most of those forms you can get through your insurance company. You can find them online through your state's Department of Health. Most of them have access to those. Or if you do any estate planning, if you have a will, you should be able to get them through your estate lawyer.
Well, thank you for sharing your insight on the dark things that we don't talk about, that we should talk about more and make light of more, I suppose. Not that we want to downplay grief, but these are important conversations, and you brought up a lot of great points. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Thank
Yeah, grief comes after, like grief is its own thing, but there's a whole world of things that can happen before you get to that point. And, like one of the things is there's no light without dark. We have to have both to be whole.
Well, thank you, Teresa.
Sure. Thank you, Sara and Jolene.
This podcast is brought to you by Nova Healthcare Administrators. Why did they let us do this? Because at the end of the day, every Nova associate is driven to do what is right. We want what's best for our clients and their members, and we do a great job sharing what we learn with each other. Between our colleagues and business partners, we know a lot of kind, smart, and thoughtful people who we convince to share their tips with you.
Don't forget to leave a review, give us a like or subscribe, but most importantly, share. We'll find the insiders, you share it with the outsiders. You can find our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. We're also on Twitter at UNDR The Coverage.